Howdy, Yags. Hey. Welcome to Monday lunch after Snowvid 21. I appreciate you guys coming in. And to get things started, I'd like to ask Reagan to come up and with our invocation and pledge.
We're going to say prayer, and then afterwards we'll do the pledge, and then we'll say the pledge for the state of Texas as well. If you would bow your heads with me. Almighty God, our Father, we're grateful for the sunshine that we have today. Father, we're thankful for all of our friends and neighbors that pitched in and helped each other to get through this past week. Father, we pray for those that are disadvantaged, that need extra help. Father, help us to look around and be servants of yours. Father, we thank you for our school. We thank you for those that are here today. Thank you for our speaker and his life experiences that he will share with us today. Father, we thank you for all your many blessings. It's in his name that we do pray. Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One state under God, one and indivisible.
Thanks, Reagan. We've got some Silver Taps notices that we got from the association. Bernard Bernie Ornette, class of 60, passed away last week. Esmo Sines, class of 65, passed away in November, but was reported through the association. We've got another San Antonio Ag, Joseph Vandewally, class of 67, passed away last week. And then we've got Charles Fox, class of 57, who also passed away. If y'all would take a second for a moment of silence to honor these Aggies, please. All right. Do we have any new members or guests with us today? Doesn't look like we've got any. Aggie athletics. Got a lot going on right now with athletics. The women's basketball team, 20-1, number 5 in the country. They just defeated Ole Miss 66-55 last week. Yesterday. Men's basketball is still quarantining, so they're still above 500 because of that. Aggie baseball, they dropped their first 2 games to Xavier, which was kind of a surprise, but they did win this. They did win the series finale 15-0, so kind of bounced back there. Men's tennis team, number 10 in the country, they defeated Vanderbilt to open up SEC play. They are 5-1 overall. We've got another top-ranked team. Women's soccer is number 9 in the country. They just got their season kicked off. They defeated North Texas in an exhibition match. The men's swimming has got its highest ranking since 2001. They're number 3 in the country. Headed to Columbia this week, actually tomorrow, for the SEC championship up in Missouri. And there's a junior on the team, Shane Casas, has the fastest time in the country in 4 events, and he's already set 6 school records this year. Women's softball split a couple of games this last week. They're 2-2 on the season to get started. All right, our capital campaign, we're inching closer every week. Right now, we need $138,500 to that will be matched by Mays to complete our funding for the project. And then our first fundraiser of the year we've got coming up on March 19th as at Canyon Springs Golf Course. And it'll be a socially distanced event, so you'll have to keep your mask on unless you're drinking beer. And that's coming up soon. So if you haven't signed up,
The way I play, I will definitely be socially distanced. I will be out in the woods.
if you're on Reagan's team, you don't have to worry about being too close to him. Part of the fundraiser in the golf tournament is a staycation, 2-night stay and 4 rounds of golf at the JW Marriott for $10. So that's a pretty good deal if you get that, if you win that one. And we are taking pre-orders right now for the 2021 Fiesta medals. They're going to be $10. Order them quick before they cancel. And then if you missed 2020, we still got a few left. So we've got a very active young Aggie group this year. Paul Shooter Jr. is heading that up, and he's got a work day planned on March 13th. So if there's any Aggies, if you guys or anybody you know wants to help out around the park, we'll be doing some work on the caretaker's home, the pavilion outside, repaint some light posts, power washing, some flower bed cleanup, landscaping, and rock removal. Just some things that need to get done around the house, around the club. And so that's coming up. We haven't had a member directory, an actual hard copy member directory, since 2013. And Don Priest, our secretary, is taking the lead on this. We're going to do one for the 100-year anniversary. So if you're not a member, sign up now so you can get in the 100-year membership directory. Also, if you've got a business that you want highlighted in there, we're going to have a section for Aggie-owned businesses. So that's something to look forward to.
Verify your information, if your family, your address, your phone number. This is why people are going to find you in the next 10 years. So make sure you update everything there. Mary's going to sign in form over here. Anytime in the next 3 months, we're going to give you plenty of time to get that taken care of.
All right, thanks, Tom. We've got some merchandise on the way that we're going to be selling also to commemorate the 100-year anniversary. We've got vests, button-down shirts, hoodies, hats, some T-shirts, and some polos that you can get right now, and a few hats left. So look for that on the website and every Monday at Monday lunch.
Yeah, anytime you want it, you can call Mary and arrange to get it. We're going to have a stock going, but talk to Mary anytime you want, and you can pre-order it early, or if you don't, we'll have it in stock. You can buy it right then. But talk to Mary, we'll get you taken care of.
All right, now I'd like to call up our Vice President, Reagan Freiling, to introduce our speaker today.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Okay, our speaker today, whom I'm sure is no stranger to our audience, is originally from Kansas. He graduated from Oklahoma University with a BA in Communications. After serving in the U.S. Army, he worked as an assistant to Chick Hearn at KNX in Los Angeles. He began his Texas radio and television broadcast career in 1960, first at WFAA, KLIF, KDFW TV in Dallas, then KNUZ and KQUE in Houston, and finally at Ken's TV in San Antonio, where he worked for 28 years as a reporter, producer, and sports anchor. Gary DeLaune has received numerous journalism awards, including the AP Best Radio Documentary Award for Jack Ruby's 11th Hour, the Sigma Delta Chi Award for Best Television Sports Feature in 1975 and in 1990, the AP Best Feature Award in 1975, and the AP Best Spot News Award in 1979. The Texas Hospital and Texas Veterinarian Association Awards. He has been inducted into the Silver Circle of the Lone Star Emmy Award Association and 4 Radio and Sports Halls of Fame. Not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Sports Halls of Fame. Last year he received, I thought this was a really cool award in recognition. Are y'all familiar with Comalander Stadium? Now the press box is named after Gary DeLaune. It's the Gary DeLaune press box. That's how it will forever be known. With his list of firsts, Gary has become an icon. In 1962, Gary DeLaune was the first to broadcast the story that Tom Landry was the first NFL coach in history to receive a 10-year contract. In 1963, he was the first to broadcast from the Neiman Marcus fire in downtown Dallas. In 1963, he reported He reported to be the first newsman to broadcast the bulletin that President John F. Kennedy had been shot by a sniper in Dallas. In 1963, he was the first to air the fact that the suspected assassin of President Kennedy, Lee Harvey Oswald, had lived in Russia, was a Marxist, and reportedly had been under investigation and surveillance by the FBI and the Secret Service. In 63, he also was the first to broadcast an interview with Jack Ruby's sister about his actions in the slaying of Lee Harvey Oswald. In 63, he was the first to break the news that the Dallas Texans were moving to Kansas City. And I'm going to see if he'll tell that story. That's an interesting one. Anyway, he has a list of all kinds of firsts it's really amazing. I'm so excited. Actually, Gary, I have to read a couple more. I know y'all didn't come to hear me, but I've got to read a couple more of these. He was the first in 1973, the first San Antonio sportscaster to become a member of the Spurs broadcast team. In 75, the first sportscaster to broadcast an NBA game from the New Orleans Superdome on the radio. He was the first reporter to broadcast live from the scene of the Fiesta Battle of Flowers parade where the sniper attack happened. He was the first announcer to broadcast UTSA basketball games. He was the voice of the Roadrunners for 5 years. He was the first San Antonian ever honored by Southwest Airlines with the Good Neighbor Award. And I thought this was cool. In 1995, he was the first San Antonio sportscaster to broadcast the state championship games in Austin in basketball and football in the same season, and both teams won the state title. In 96, he produced a series on the bombing of the Oklahoma Federal Building called A Year of Tears in Oklahoma. He's been a two-time president of the Texas Association Press Broadcasters Association. He was a member of the Southwest Conference Football Network from 1981 to 1986. And for 8 years, Gary was the play-by-play voice of the University Incarnate Word Athletics. This year, after 61 years broadcasting Texas high school football, Gary retired. How many of y'all have worked in the same job for 10 years? How many for 20 years? 30 years? 40 years? 50 years? 60 years? That's amazing. That's really, really amazing. I also saw an interview that was done with Gary, and it said, people who make San Antonio great. And Gary DeLaune is somebody that has made San Antonio great. I'd like to welcome my friend, the man, the legend, Gary DeLaune.
Well, after that long list, my speech is 3 minutes long. But let's go ahead and get this out of the way now so it won't be embarrassing to anybody. If you don't want to hear it or don't want to leave early, that's fine. Because who in the hell can believe what a newsman says today anyway? Well, I come here the chance I get, because it's free when they ask me. But good morning to all of you, and thanks to Reagan. You've survived our recent example of global warming. The weather's been nastier than a Nancy Pelosi prayer, and no doubt she was requesting the Lord let Maxine Waters be golf caddy to Donald Trump. I think she might be meaner than Hillary Clinton at a Monica Lewinsky tea party. Now, I've been in the news and sports world of journalism since I discovered that my efforts to make the KU basketball team were as forgettable as a Joe Biden speech. My hope and prayer is that the Lord provide us survival kits for the next 4 years, friends. I want to thank Reagan and John for asking me today and letting me absorb a little of the A&M atmosphere and attitude, because at this time, my friends, we need it. I'm not a graduate of your great university, but we have an alliterative connection. I'm not an Aggie, but an Okie. I graduated from OU, BS, before Barry Switzer, by the way, yes, BS. But for those of you that may not know, I think Barry received a bum rap in Norman because he recruited nothing but the honor students. Yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. So, But I was there when Bud Wilson coached them to 47 wins in a row, and I don't think that will ever be broken, especially today when so many great players leave for the NFL ranks. We've seen so many tremendous athletes attend A&M, but with President Biden ruling on gender, we may get to see a 230-pound boy decide he wants to be a girl wrestler and change his name from Sam to Samantha. I shouldn't mention this today, but I felt a little different this morning, so my boxer shorts have pink lace and I couldn't find the unisex restroom. My grandson Chase returned to College Station Saturday, where he's majoring in economics. And last August, when first arrived there, he called home and said, "Mom," he said, "Mom, I was born to be an Aggie." My wife took him when he was 8 weeks old because my daughter went back to work. She was marketing manager at the Alamo Dome. So we raised him basically. San Antonio Academy and the Alamo Heights, et cetera, et cetera. He was just a little guy now. He's 6'2", big strapping kid, great athlete, but he doesn't care much for it anymore. He was my broadcast partner for several years. Started with me when he was 12, as my son also did. He interviewed players for the broadcast, and at 17, he became the star and youngest play-by-play announcer in Texas on radio. My beautiful daughter-in-law is an Aggie grad, and my first friend when I moved to San Antonio from Houston was the late Pete Callison, one of the directors of the 12th Man Foundation. Today, Richard Oliver, who has been here several times, former sports editor and writer for the Express News, one of my best friends today, and I truly admire a two-term president of the San Antonio Quarterback Club, Reagan Friday. Uh-oh, that's not on cue, people. They'll have to wait. But I want to tell you about the Gridiron Heroes. Are you all familiar with Gridiron Heroes? Reagan has done such a good job. He was two-term president. Our primary function at the Quarterback Club, by the way, the Quarterback Club was founded in 1947, the oldest continuing quarterback club in the nation. And so many great San Antonians have been president: Red McCombs, Henry Franca, Rudy Davalos, Jerry Comlander, this goes on. We had the first woman president of a quarterback club in the nation a few years ago until she passed away. Our primary function is to provide support and money to Gridiron Heroes, the football players who suffered spinal cord injuries playing football, founded by aiding Chris Canales after Chris almost died on the field a few years ago at San Marcos Academy. They assist the young men with money, vans, and psychological support. You may recall the case of David Edwards, a young player that was injured while playing in the playoffs against Wesley for Madison. He too almost died on the field. He did pass away a few years ago. I became very close to that family. In 1960, I was hired by WFA in Dallas to broadcast high school football because no station in Big D was airing high school games in those days. I left that station after the first season to become a newsman and sports reporter for Gordon McClendon. Everybody remember the name Gordon McClendon, the old Scotsman, the greatest radio announcer of the 50s and 60s. He always opened his broadcast by saying, "Hello, everybody, this is the old Scotsman, Gordon McClendon. It's a windswept afternoon in Chicago, and the ivy-covered walls provide a backdrop of beautiful scenery here at Wrigley Field." He was amazing. So I listened to him all the time when I was about 10 or 11 years old. We didn't know what television was. And a great, great teaching tool for my career, never realizing someday I'd work for him. KLIF was the innovator of the top 40 format, the rock and roll stage, and one of the industry's leading radio stations. It also owned KTSA here and KILT in Houston. In the early 60s, the Dallas Cowboys were born thanks to the effort of Clint Murkison and joined the NFL. At the same time, another pro football league was formed, the AFL, American Football League, and another Dallas millionaire, Lamar Hunt, was the owner of the newly named Dallas Texans. And to prove that I did work for the Texans, here is the Dallas Texans banner. And you see the little bobblehead doll? My daughter looked that up. That little sucker was $750 on the internet. Dallas Texans. And then you see the other, there's the old t-shirt over there, Texans and the Cowboys. And, I have to prove that I was there, so I bring this with me. I joined the Texas broadcast team in '62 with Charlie Jones and Bill Mercer, served 1 year there. Cowboys were carried by KLAF as Marcus and McClendon were friends. So we had two new pro teams competing for fans and ticket sales. We averaged 15,000 a game for each team. If you can believe that, the Cotton Bowl, 80,000 capacity. The PA announcer would come on before the game and say, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to move down from the upper deck, you can come down to the 50-yard line. It looked like more people were in the stands. So those are the days that I broadcast. But I became the color analyst for the Cowboys, and I was with them in 63, 64, and again in 66. I continued to do high school football since the Ranger stations were carrying again. I did work at KRLD doing football with Frank Gleaver for a while. So I started doing McKinney football, and I used to tell everybody, yeah. I said, heck, I made more working for McKinney High School than I did for the Cowboys. They only paid me $50 a game, and George Smith, the owner of KL and McKinney, paid me $50 plus mileage. So I made more money there. But Reagan's already mentioned the two sports breaks of my career, the two urgent scoops, I would say. I copyrighted the story in Landry, and again on the move to Kansas City. How I got that tip, Reagan said, can you tell that? Well, I was making $118 a week. Gordon McClendon was the old Scotchman, and I understood why. He wouldn't pay us anything. Paid all the DJs big money. Anyway, I became a friend with the sales manager, the department manager at Neiman Marcus. And he knew I couldn't afford to buy sport coats there. But once a year, he would call me and say, Gary, we're having a bargain basement sale at Neiman's down in the basement. So I'd run over and buy a couple of sport coats. Instead of $600, I'd pay $100 a quarter. So one of his clients, I never told this on the air because I'm not sure if she's still with us. I don't think she is. But Lamar Hunt was in the middle of a divorce at that time. And I loved Lamar. He was a great guy. His wife was one of my friend's clients. And she said, Jack, I think this is a big story. So what's going on, Mrs. Hunt? And he said, well, Lamar, Jack Stedman, and Hank Stram are in Kansas City. They're going to move the Texans to Kansas City. This was after the 62 season now that I had done color. Well, he called me and said, Gary, I have a good tip for you. I said, what is it, Jack? He told me that Mrs. Hunt had told him this, and I said, oh my gosh. Well, Bob Halford was a UT graduate, great sports information director for the Texans, and I called and said, Bob, I know you're not in Kansas City, but if you had an irreparable source, an immovable source, and it was irrevocable, he knew exactly what I was talking about. I said, what would you do? He said, I think I'd go with it. So that's when I called UPI, and they copyrighted the story. And it created a furor in Kansas City. I mean, it just broke on the wires. It was really something else. And then, of course, the handshake between Tom and Clint Murkison on the 10-year contract. Never happened before, never happened since. So in my 61 years now, I've enjoyed some of the most memorable news and sports events a lucky journalist could ever report. I became a good, close friend with Coach Tom Landry. And Tex invited me to his house many times. And of course, my childhood hero, when I was growing up in Oklahoma, in a little Philco, listened to the OU games, and a guy named Darrell Roy would come out of the Navy. Darrell weighed 167 pounds. Backup quarterback to Jack Mitchell. He was a defensive back, and he was a punter. And he had the longest punt in OU history until a guy named Joe DeLaune broke it back about 20-some years ago. But a few years ago, I don't think Reagan was a member then of the quarterback club. Darrell always wanted me to introduce him. He said, no, I'm not going to make a speech. You just introduce me and I'll take questions. So I made this flowery introduction, my childhood hero, Hollis, Oklahoma, great hero. And I said, not only that, but our special guest today owns the all-time pass interception record at OU with 17. And I hear this, 18. Darrell corrected me. And we became good friends, and just a tremendous guy. I left radio for KRLD TV, worked there for 2 years, and then was offered a job in Houston as news and sports director for 2 stations. And I got a call one day from a guy named Bill Giles. Now, you may know Bill Giles. His dad was the president of the National Baseball League, Major League Baseball, and he later became owner of the Philadelphia Phillies. And Bill said, Gary, can you become the voice of the Astros in the Dome? I said, oh yeah, man, me? Well, this is right after Slater Martin had asked me to become the voice of the Mavericks, the ABA team that was ill-fated after 1 year. But anyway, became the voice of the Astros for 4 years. And then Don Klosterman of the Oilers asked me to stay on as the voice of the Oilers. And I had this distinction. I was given a standing ovation in the Astrodome for singing. That's hard to believe. What happened was the music went out on the giant scoreboard and the words were there, but we had no music. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, will you please stand and join me in the singing the national anthem? So after it was over, they all turned and gave me a standing ovation. So, and Reagan didn't mention one of the most unusual halls of fame that I was inducted into. I'm a member of the Strutters Hall of Fame at Texas State. They didn't like my high kick, but I did some stories that they liked. So. And after 4 years of being the announcer for the Dome, with every event I had to cover, my gosh, I counted up one year, I think 135 nights I was at the Dome. And my wife, my beautiful, lovely wife, who was an RN supervisor when I met her, and she was part Cherokee Indian, and if you got her on the warpath, she could be pretty tough. And she said, Gary, I'm getting damn tired of being a damn Dome widow. So that kind of pushed me a little bit toward the, matrimonial bliss. So I got a call. I left my job at K News because there was just so much pressure on me. I was over 2 stations and doing all the sports and everything. So I was without a job. I was the PIO for the PIO officer for the Houston Fire Department. I'd been lucky enough to win 3 firefighter awards from them, and so they asked me to do that freelance. So I did that. That's the only money I had coming in. And I came over here for a convention at La Mansion downtown. And I had been president of the News Directors Association of Texas. And they wouldn't let me resign. He said, no, you gotta fill this out, your term. So I did. Well, the night the convention closed, I got a visit from the AP guy in New York. The head guy said, oh, come on, I'm gonna turn this thing off. That's Jerry Conlander, by the way. I'll call him later. So anyway, they offered me a job in New York, and it was a big step up the ladder. They said, we're gonna start you 5 steps up the pay ladder. We're gonna pay you way up there. We've never done that before. And so that was the only job offer I had. So we went home to Houston. The next day I got a call from Bob Rogers, who was news director of Kim's TV. He said, when can you come to work? And I turned to my wife and I said, honey, New York or San Antonio? She said, well, I'm not going to New York. So that's why we came to San Antonio. And I tell you what, when you go from being a news and sports director and you lose about 1/3 of your paycheck, it was tough living in San Antonio, but we recovered and we loved it. Wouldn't go anyplace else. But because of my long association with Tex and Daryl, when the Humble Network folded, you remember Kern Tips and Connie Alexander and all those guys? I'd tried for years to get in the Humble Network, but it was a very close fraternity. But when Humble closed and Kern retired, Mutual took over. So I got a call one day from a guy named Dick Burnett, who was charging Mutual. Daryl and Tex had both recommended me for the Mutual Network. And so Dick said, Gary, you're gonna do 5 Aggie games this year. 5 Aggie games? I don't know anything about the Aggies. He said, that's your first assignment. So a guy named Dave Barnett, who's still around, Dave does a lot of great games. So I went to work for the Aggies, and I had never really met Jackie Sherrill. The only time in my career I had to be in town at least 24 hours before the next day's game. I had to be in his office at 2:30 at College Station, ready to do the interview. And it wasn't played, of course, it was played before the game, 24 hours later. In those days, for those of you that are well known to Jackie, or he knows you and you know him, His personality is a little brash, if you can recall that. You older guys. And I realized later with age he had really mellowed. I like Jackie now. Jackie grew up, he and his brother grew up in Duncan, Oklahoma. And so we were familiar with some of the things that went on up there. And Dan Cook did not like Jackie. His brother was a retired colonel in the U.S. Army. And he'd call and tell Cook he wasn't covering enough Aggie stories. And so I've talked to Colonel Sherrill a few times, but I really do like Jackie Sherrill. I think he's a class act today. And I've introduced him several times at the Quarterback Club. The last time I visited College Station, though, it wasn't the same as in 81, 83. The day Chase and I were guests of Andrew Monaco and Scott Witherell, we're in the press box on the track with 104,000 Aggie fans. Man, was I impressed. I was impressed. And ran into RC that day, and it was good to reminisce. What an impression, though, for a young man who had visited 5 colleges and had already made his decision. I'm going to tell you an inside story. I don't want to tell something on my alma mater. Of course, I'd always wanted Chase to go to Oklahoma. So out of his senior year, he went to Texas Tech. He liked Tech fine. TCU he didn't like at all. He thought it was kind of a snob school. He went to Baylor, and Baylor was good. Of course, my 2 kids had gone there, and he saved A&M for last, but he went to Oklahoma and drove up to Norman, hot day. Well, I'd always ballyhooed Oklahoma and how great it was. And when he first got there, they took him out under the giant scoreboard at Owen Memorial Stadium, and he had his picture made and impressed him, you know. So they go up to the admissions office where they have to have some work done and, you know, presentation. About 60 parents, grandparents, and students, prospective students. And Chase he'd have to describe this to you. He said, God. He said, we were standing here and it was hot. And he said, I was waiting for this presentation from OU. And this young man runs out from the office and he's got a little streak in his hair. And he said, his jeans are so tight, God, you didn't have to guess what sexuality he had. And he said, oh, hi, everybody. We just love having you here. He said, we love rainbows and sprinkles at OU. He turned to his mom and said, that's it, Mom. And that was it. OU was not on the list anymore. And he said, I knew, he called back after the last trip was to A&M. He said, God, you know what? He said, the dumpsters and the porta potties are all Aggie colors. So that was really impressive to a senior at Alamo Heights, but he loves it. He's met a lot of great friends. His room is in Callaway Hall, overlooking the practice field. And Andrew Monaco had called him a couple of times, maybe to work with him, hopefully next year. Mark Witherell wants him to work with him in the 12-Man Foundation. So I'm just as, you know, I'm proud that he's over there. Now, real quickly, my association with Jack Ruby. And let's see. Hang on a minute. This is the entire 24-hour period and later of the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Jack Ruby. And I got a phone call one day. The hotline was right under the news desk. I get a call. What do you know about the shots being fired to motorcade? Kennedy being hit? I said, I don't know, but I'll find out. Bam, I hang up. The rule was start that 24-hour tape and ask who's calling. Well, I was so stunned I didn't do either. But I called the police department, my contact over the Dorothy Plimpton. I asked her, I said, Dorothy, this Carrie, and she said, yes, it is true. Well, so I went on the air, and the rest they say is now history.
Killed Sunday morning in November of 1963 was the second chapter in one of the most tragic chain events in the 20th century.
And the rest they say is history. Changed my life, changed my career, changed my outlook. And Jack was looking for me, by the way, since I was on KLIF every morning doing the news. He came to the police department looking for me on Friday night after the assassination. And he was a nuisance. Jack was a little insignificant Jewish guy from Chicago. He had a bad complex. He's only like 5'7". And he always wanted to be a big shot. Now, he had the Carousel Club, which was kind of a counterpart to the Colony Club, which was owned by Abe Weinstein, who was another exotic club owner. But Jack had as his star girls, he had, let's see, Bubbles Cash, a Girl Joy, Candy Bar, and the one that I knew, Patricia Coles, her stage name was Penny Dollar. And I didn't know this at the time, but I was a young single guy living at the Live Oak Apartments in Dallas, and I would be out at the swimming pool on a hot summer day, and I'd see this beautifully clad mostly clad young lady in a bikini, and well, she listened to KLIF all the time. I didn't know she was a dancer. She asked me for my autograph because she listened to KLIF, so I had this big picture, signed it to Patricia. Well, I heard later that picture was on her coffee table when the FBI interviewed her. So I don't know what mind they had, but Jim LaBelle, who is the. You gonna put that picture back up? You heard the description of the shot. This was Jim LaBelle. He just died last year. One of my dearest friends. I've known him for 56 years, and he was the detective in charge of JFK's assassination, even though Secret Service and FBI took over. And he also was in charge of the shooting of J.D. Tippit. He was the officer killed by Oswald in Fort Worth. But Oswald worked at the Texas School Book Depository, which you're aware of, and he raced home on a bus at 310 Beckley. He lived in a rooming house with 7 other guys. He and Marina were separated, looked like they were going to get divorced. She was living with a friend named Ruth Payne. And so he goes to Oak Cliff, changes, and it was a cold afternoon. Runs down the steps, and the landlady says, "Oh, Lee, I see you've been changing clothes. You got to go somewhere." Well, he took off, never said a word. So J.D. Tippit was patrolling Oak Cliff, and he heard the bulletin. Suspect, 5'10", 5'11", Anglo, about 5'10", 160 pounds. Well, he saw this guy rushing along the sidewalk. Back in those days, no automatic windows in cop cars, right? So he leans over. They theorize this, nobody knows. Roll down the window and say, "Hey, young man, come around, I want to see you." So Oswald comes around in front of the squad car, and just as JD gets out, bam, 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 bam! 3 shots in the fourth while he was down. Killed him instantly. There were some Hispanic neighbors about 30 yards away. They saw this happen. Well, so he gets and runs back down toward Jefferson. There was a young man at the Hardy's shoe store, 2 doors down from the Texas Theater. And he was listening, of all things, to KLIF, because everybody did in those days. We were the station. He'd heard my bulletin, of course, on Kennedy. And so when he heard the description, Roy Nichols and I continued to broadcast on KLIF, the description. So he saw this young man, and he'd come by and look in and sneak around the store windows. I used to be the concave type, And so Lee Harvey, Johnny Brewer was only 23, listening to KLIF. The ticket taker at the Texas Theater also had a portable radio listening to KLIF. So Lee rushes into the Texas Theater. Johnny Brewer runs out and says, "Did he go in?" "Yeah, he just ran in." Well, first he went up to the balcony, took a seat. Johnny Brewer ran back to his store, called the PD, said, "Hey, there's a guy in this description." And of course, by that time, they had reported that JD had been shot. So they raced to the back of the shoe store. No, go. It's at the theater. So they go in the back door behind the screen, and they come in there. And so Lee Harvey has gone downstairs since then, took a seat. in one of the front rows. And 5 cops, including Emmett McDonald, a good friend of mine, they converge on him. Well, he had the 38 on him that he shot JD with. He pulls the gun out, and just as he does, now Nick told me, he rams his hand in between the hammer and the pin, blocks the trigger from firing, because Oswald was trying to pull the trigger. So he hits him up right here, bang, and they arrest him. And I said, well, Nick, what did he say? He said, all he said was, this is it. And that's when they brought him to the PD. That's when Jack Ruby first saw Lee Harvey Oswald. He had gone to get sandwiches for me because he was at KLF making himself a nuisance because he wanted to be somebody. He'd pick up and say, KLF news, Jack Ruby, what can I do? And so he said, okay, I'll go get sandwiches. And we went over to the delicatessen on Cedar Springs and ordered corned beef sandwiches. I wouldn't have eaten one anyway, I ate it. But he brought him to the PD. He came down the ramp instead of going up to the stairs. I was up on the 3rd floor of the press room giving reports every 10 minutes. And I'll say this about Gordon McClendon. He knew I had the contacts. He never one time asked me, what did you got? He'd say, let's go to Gary DeLaune. My sources, I mean, to tell you, I had a source in homicide. And Lavelle was right. He said, DeLaune had more sources than I did. Walt Ponce was my friend. He told me exactly. He said, yeah, this guy's name, Lee Harvey Oswald. He lived in Russia, married to a Russian girl. He was a marksman. He told me all this stuff. So UPI started monitoring KLIF. And so they just repeated what we said on the air. So Jack, I've been there for hours. And so they said, Jack, go to the PD, do something. Take some sandwiches. So he came to the PD after being out the delicatessen, goes down the ramp, and that's when he sees this lineup. They bring in Oswald. He's handcuffed, of course. Got his Marxist sign up like this, and he denied knowing anything about it. Well, that's when Jack stood against the wall. You saw pictures of him on network TV, kind of staring. And so that's when he went home and decided to avenge Jackie Kennedy. And Sunday morning, he telegrammed $50 to one of his girls. Of course, she was late in her rent in Fort Worth. So that's when you get telegraph money, you know. So he sent money over and parked his car down by the Western Union and walked 128 seconds to get down to the basement. Well, you get down like this, there was a guy turning in. We didn't have a lot of cops around, no cordoned off area. Maybe 2 or 3 cops out front in one way. The ramp goes down one way and one goes up the other street. Commerce and then Harwood. So Jack, this is Sunday morning now, after you've decided to avenge Jackie Kennedy. And that's the picture you see. Did you show that? Jim Lavelle was in the white suit. Somebody said, Jim, it's November, why are you wearing a white suit? He said, I only had 2 and one was in the cleaners. So you can see that's Will Fritz leading the way, and that was a horrible time. And Bob Jackson, as the car was backing down, he would have his camera like this, and he was taking pictures like this on the back of the trunk, and I'm right next to him. And Clarence Beers, they had this big network camera. First off, they were supposed to move it at 3:30 in the morning, and all the network guys went to Chief Curry and said, Chief, we got to show this nationally. We got to show this. Well, he relented and said, okay, we'll move in at 9 or 9:30. They timed it out. The car's supposed to back down the ramp. And Will Fritz and Lavelle and Spoke Chambers were going to bring him down, open the door, and push him into the Galaxy. Well, they tried to back down an armored car. There had so many threats against Lee Harvey Oswald that they thought they'd use an armored car as a decoy. Well, they backed the armored car down. It stuck on the air conditioning duct because it wasn't high enough. So they pulled it out and backed the car down. And that's when you hear me say, here he comes. And all hell broke loose. And as I said, the rest is history. Now, there's so many things I could tell, but I don't want to take a whole lot of time. If you've got some questions, let me answer them. Yes, sir.
Gary, I noticed you didn't say anything about Vern Lindquist. Do you have any?
Who's that?
Vern Lindquist.
Vern wasn't really involved in the assassination much. He was a sports guy.
Oh, I know, I'm just asking.
Yeah, he was a sports guy on Channel 8.
Okay.
I love Vern. You know, became voice of Cowboys for many, many years. And was a great voice. He had surgery 2 years ago. He had to retire. I love Vern. He and I were good friends. And by the way, he's on the Board of Regents at Texas Lutheran. He graduated from Texas Lutheran. And Bob Huffaker was going live for KRLD, and I was going live. He was on KRLD NBC, and I was on tape. We had a little dinky recorder, little reel-to-reel. Gordon wouldn't spend any money on equipment for news people. We had great news units, but no great equipment. So I recorded all this as it happened and ran 2 blocks or 2.5 blocks back to KLAF and went on the air with it. And you can't see it, but so many officers, I've got all these marks in my book, I know who they are. This guy here was, he and his partner were vice squad officers. And because of Ravel's position here, the strobe lights from the big camera, he could only see from the waist down. He didn't know who it was from John Doe. He just saw this pistol coming up, and Jack took a step and a half, and bang! And when Ravel saw the gun come up, he jerked Lee Harvey because he was handcuffed to him and had his hand on his belt and pulled him. He said, Gary, if I hadn't pulled him, maybe it wouldn't have killed him. But it went all the way through his guts and came out under one of his ribs right here. And when they got him to Parkland, Doris Nelson, who I knew well, she was the emergency nurse. He said, Doris, dig that bullet out right now and put your initials on it, because I don't want any question that that's not the bullet that killed Lee Harvey Oswald. So that's what she did. And then went to the Warren Commission. I guess it's in where the bullet is now. But they did identify the bullet that killed Lee Harvey Oswald. And I should have brought it with me. It would have been nice to look at. I have an autopsy picture of Lee Harvey Oswald that was purloined by the guy who wasn't supposed to sell it. He got $80 for it to a reporter. He turned around and sold it for $800 to the Philadelphia Inquirer. But this guy here, and I told you was a vice squad officer, somewhere on the sound of the camera, you could hear this guy said, Jack, you SOB. Well, everybody thought that was Ravel, but it wasn't. He didn't know who it was. But this guy recognized Ruby because he was always at the club inspecting the Carousel Club as a vice squad officer. And so, see, Jack had come to the PD that night to bring those sandwiches, and that was never known until the appeals trial in 1964. They called me to testify, and they said, Gary, bring the tape that you have during the trial when you caught a tape of Jack Ruby. He was whisked by, and I'll tell you the story in a minute. As he was going by, I said, Jack, do you want Joe Tannehill as one of your defense attorneys? He said, hell no, get him off there, get him off. So they wanted me to bring that to court. So I held up my hand and they said, what's your name? I said, Gary DeLaune, KLA. And Jack was sitting about where Reagan is. I was looking for you. Where were you? Where were you? And everybody was, what are you talking about? That's the first time anybody had ever heard that he was looking for me. And so it was just one scenario after another. But during the trial, since I was the police reporter, basically, in addition to other things, I on Ruby. Well, you get there early and you slide in, and I'd slide in. Well, network people center, Dorothy Kilgallen. You remember Dorothy Kilgallen on What's My Line? You remember her? She was a New York writer, and she had a sauce problem. Every night. She'd come in late, and so she'd slide in and say, can I see your notes? So I'd let her have my notes. But during the trial, Melvin Belli was the chief attorney. I called him the San Francisco Port. He'd wear a $600 suit, and he introduced all of the evidence, everything. So anyway, I was covered up by myself and had all these network guys with pieces of equipment, the Zoom mics, and put it. Well, I couldn't get any sound. I was ticked off. So on the way home that night, I stopped at a grocery store and got an orange crate. And I cut out a little slab about that long. And the next day on the news, I'm standing on a chair here, and I'm putting my microphone taped slap over here. And the guy said, get that out of here. I said, you go to hell. Go to hell. So But I got the sound anyway. And it was one circus act after another. Joe Brown, who was our first judge on it, he got removed from the case because he was writing a book during the trial about the trial. Joe B. Brown, and a lot of bushy hair, sat there at his bench. He had a spittoon. He hit it every time. So it was just one, you couldn't have made a script better than what this was. But it changed my life. It changed my career. I don't know how many times Jim and I were asked to be together. 2 years ago, I went up to a big company in Dallas, had me come up to be at the Texas Theater, and we were on stage answering questions from hundreds of Dallasites, and it was amazing. I was in the right place at the right time, and thank God I knew what to do. Now, Reagan, you had a question?
I do. Does anybody else have a question for Gary? I was going to ask you, Gary, you covered high school football for 61 years. Can you pick out your 5 best athletes that you saw?
Yeah.
Or
I get this question all the time. I covered basketball for 30-some years. And the question was, in basketball, who was the best player you ever saw? Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, who was it? I said, Pistol Pete Maravich. The best overall, now they didn't ask me the best scorer, the best rebounder. The best overall player I ever saw was Pistol Pete Maravich. He could pass, dribble, shoot, defend, phenomenal. Died at the age of 46, playing pickup basketball. The greatest I ever saw in football. Oh my gosh. I believe Bob Lilly's the best defensive player I ever saw. He was from Throckmorton, Texas, by the way. And when I was at OU, the best player I ever saw was a guy named Jim Weatherall, All-American, from a town called White Deer, Texas. I didn't see him play in college, but Leroy Jordan was one of the best linebackers I ever saw. And Randy White. I got to know some of the guys from other teams too. Oh my gosh. Earl Campbell had to be the most devastating runner I ever saw, but the best I ever saw running the ball, Jim Brown, no doubt in my mind. He was the greatest runner I ever saw, better than Sweetness, better than Campbell. The guy would be manhandled by 3 players, and he would just barely get up, and you'd think he's hurt. He'd go back to him, and boom, he'd go 20 yards the next play. He was the greatest runner I ever saw, and the greatest quarterback I ever saw. And I got a call from the Naval Academy back in '63. They said, "Hey, our quarterback can't come to the game with SMU. Can you do the game?" Well, a guy named Roger Staubach was a quarterback. His first only loss at the Naval Academy. SMU beat him that night, and I was doing the color. But the best quarterback I ever saw, a guy named Johnny Manziel, without a doubt. The night I did the game at Heroes, 72-58, I think was the final. Against Madison High School. Jim Street had 2 All-State linebackers. They couldn't get within a foot of him. Out of 572 total yards for Kerrville Tivy, Johnny Manziel had 571 of them. The best I ever saw. No, I didn't get to see Baker Mayfield now, and I didn't get to see Patrick Mahomes. But the best quarterback that I ever saw, and that included Tommy Kramer, Cody Carlson, the best I ever saw. And what a shame. But let me just tell you a quick sidebar in case you don't know it. Some of you may know it already. Lon Oakley was a PA guy out at stadium. And to give you an idea how the attitude that Johnny's dad and mom had, I think they made the kid what he is personally. But anyway, Lon didn't know Johnny Manziel. So Lon said, now starting a quarterback for the Kerrville Tivy is Johnny Manziel. it didn't take 2 minutes for this woman to run up to the press box and his name's Johnny Manziel. That was his mom. So that shows you that there was some kind of, and in case you didn't know it, Johnny Manziel's grandfather financed Jack Dempsey in his business back when Dempsey was the heavyweight champion. He was a very wealthy man. And I also know that when Johnny was a sophomore, and I was watching Kerrville, I'd seen him play, they had a kid named Carlton Palmer, quarterback, 6'3", 210 pounds. This kid's gonna be fantastic. Well, the Kerrville Police Department had a underage drinking party raid. And Carlton Palmer was caught in that with like 5 or 6 others. But there's a kid named Manziel that on the list. And he was there, but he wasn't ever accounted for. So that shows you that you are a product of your environment. Anybody else? Warren Pfeiffer and I changed some stories back there. I told him I still disagreed with him on the calls when I had one of his ball games. But he was one of those great guys who made Texas football what it is. I've known so many great officials. We talked about Lewis Stroud, who retired after 40 years on a gridiron, but he's still doing basketball. What is Lewis, about 75, 78? Yeah. Still doing basketball. And you know the best official I remember in basketball? Remember a guy named Joe Dennis? Oh, yeah. Little black guy, he's the best basketball official I ever saw in high school. Okay.
Garrett, thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences with us. We'd like to give you this compliments of Boulder's Fiesta products, a box of spices. And we really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Come back and join us also next week. One of our very own, Vincent Wu, 2 weeks. I scared you, didn't I, Vince? Yeah. Bob Shimwell will be here next week to talk about the Aggie Bonfire Memorial. The week after, Vincent will be here, retired Secret Service agent, be outstanding. So get your friends, tell them to come back. Let's fill this room up as much as we can. And thank everybody for social distancing and masking, and gig 'em, and we will see you next week.
And in closing, one final story. My wife was an emergency nurse down at the Baptist after we moved here from Houston. And there was a guy down there who had just come out of the Air Force, and she worked with him a lot, including Dr. Colleen, the Hinchy group. This young man's name was Jim Leininger. And so she was working on one Saturday night, and they were stacked up downtown, 72 patients or more, and knocked on the doctor's, of course, Dr. Leininger, can you come out? Can you come out? We're stacked. Well, he was in there selling these beds on the phone. It paid off.
Thank you, Garrett. If y'all want to come see some of his memorabilia, it's really, really neat. Thank y'all. Be careful. Good to see everyone today. Thank you. Thank you, Garrett.